In the United States, you will be banned on social media, suspended if you call out people targeting children with adult materials. We'll put it that way. Because the left has decided that criticizing child abuse is a slur for everyone in the LGBTQ community, which it's not. But that's the way things are going here. It may not be all bad around the world, though, because we have some big news coming out of Europe. The Times reports Tavistock gender clinic forced to shut over safety fears. Center accused of rushing vulnerable children into treatment. That's right. A gender clinic that was providing children with puberty blockers after many horrifying stories is forced to shut down. In certain Scandinavian countries, they've already stopped this process because the damage it's profound. In one story, a Swedish broadcaster investigating found that an individual who underwent puberty blockers at the age of 10 had developed osteoporosis so severe they have skeletal damage and consistent pain. That's horrifying. It really, really is. Let's read this story. We do have some other updates as well. Ron DeSantis has filed a complaint against a bar that had a partially nude individual dancing with a little girl. I mean, this stuff is getting out of hand in the United States. But let's talk about what's happening in Europe, where it's actually going a bit in the other direction. The Times reports the NHS is shutting down its gender identity clinic for children after a review found that it failed vulnerable under 18s. The Gender Identity Service at Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust has been ordered to close by next spring. It will be replaced by regional centers at existing children's hospitals offering more holistic care with strong links to mental health services. Tavistock's Gender Identity Development Service clinic has been accused of rushing children into life-altering treatment on puberty blockers. The pediatrician, Dr. Hilary Cass, who is leading a review of the service, issued a series of recommendations today for a radical overhaul of how the NHS treats young people who are questioning their gender identity. She found that the Tavistock clinic was not a safe or viable long-term option, and that other mental health issues were overshadowed when gender was raised by children referred to the clinic. I want to pause real quick and just say, I saw a photo of an individual, a young person, covered in self-cutting scars, covered all over their body. And they had received gender-affirming surgeries, as they describe it. Clearly, this individual is undergoing mental health issues. They're cutting themselves. Well, the argument from many people is that, well, yeah, they were gender dysphoric. That's why they were depressed in doing this. And I have to wonder, though, cutting yourself, it supposedly releases some kind of, chemical in the brain that takes your mind off other pain. I have to imagine if you are cutting yourself, there is something else going on. I don't believe that it is simply defined as you experienced some trauma, therefore you cut. I think the act of cutting itself is the trauma and is what needs to be addressed. Instead, it seems like my point here is they're overlooking the actual issues that may be affecting these young people and looking for a quick solution, as is what they're seeing here. Cass, former president of the Royal College of Pediatrics at Child Health, said the existing model of a sole provider for gender services should be scrapped as it failed to meet the holistic needs of distressed and vulnerable teenagers. She said Tavistock should be replaced by regional centers with an appropriate multi-professional workforce to enable them to provide an integrated model of care that manages the holistic needs of this population. Amid concerns the clinic fails to take into account wider health problems before putting children on puberty blockers, Cass added, staff should maintain a broad clinical perspective in order to embed the care of children and young people with gender uncertainty within a broader child and adolescent health context. NHS England, which commissioned Cass to review the service in September 2020, says it will implement her recommendations in full and decommission the Tavistock clinic. It has announced the launch of 2 clinics for children with gender dysphoria by next spring, which will bring together multiple doctors from a broad range of specialties. What we saw in Scandinavian countries was that they moved away from surgeries and drugs, opting for psychological therapies, mental health treatments. Clearly, there is an issue where people don't feel comfortable in their body. What can we do to address this. How is it coming to be? Why is it coming to be? And how can we help these people? The assessment from many of these organizations was what they were doing with chemicals and surgeries was not helping. Okay. I take a look at this news and I say, simply put, I don't think children should be getting sex change operations. Yet in the United States, the left has an inverted view. They believe kids should. I'm sorry. If a child wanted to get breast implants to affirm their gender, we would say no. Simply put, that's a simple example. Now, the left, they like to argue that, men get hair plugs and women get breast implants. This proves that people get gender affirming care and treatments all of the time. But those things aren't about affirming your gender. It's about trying to look attractive or more appealing or feel more confident. Now, many may argue, transgender individuals don't feel confident when they feel like they're in the wrong body. The difference is giving you a hair transplant or a toupee or something to bring back what you once had or to increase the size of your breasts. These are reversible. Now, the hair thing is less of a big deal, but it is what it is. Breast implants can be damaging, but these are also adults doing it. And I get it. If an adult is transgender, then I believe they have the right to make the choice for themselves. That's their life. I know a lot of conservatives disagree. Matt Walsh says, no one should be allowed to get this. My attitude is more like, dude, you want to go to a doctor and get surgeries and do whatever you want to yourself? I ain't you. Do your thing. Maybe it'll cause complications and problems. Maybe it will make you happier. I'm not going to, far be it for me to tell you what you should do with your body. Now, there's a double-edged sword, I suppose, in this. There have been many individuals who have undergone certain surgeries for, say, body dysmorphia, like removing fingers or hands. There was an individual who made themselves into a tiger. It did not alleviate their feelings of dysmorphia or dysphoria. Many of these individuals still end up taking their own lives. How do we solve for that? Maybe Matt Walsh is right. Maybe these surgeries are actually bad for these people. And if we really want to help them, we don't just say, go do whatever you want. We say, let me give you some proper medical treatment to help you be happy. Now, again, I still fall in the libertarian area of, I'm not going to intervene in what someone wants to do with their life. You want to go and get surgery and do whatever to your own body. You're an adult. Okay, fine. But I suppose the issue is the view from conservatives is that is a callous perspective to take. The idea being that you are condemning this person to further suffering instead of trying to help them, and you should try to help them. I'm not gonna say I know for sure what people should or shouldn't do with their lives, and they're allowed to take their own risks. That's my view on it. If you want to do it, you do it. Pinknews.co.uk says Swedish Health Board wants doctors to stop prescribing life-saving puberty blockers. I take deep offense to how they do this. It's propaganda. Now, you can advocate for puberty blockers. Fine. Life-saving? I humbly disagree. Puberty blockers are just that, puberty blockers. They're not saving your life. What they're trying to do is conflating individuals who may take their own life with a treatment that would change their bodies. There is a disconnect there. They're not even in alignment. Puberty blockers do not save your life. They may have an impact on your mental health and maybe could contribute to a lower suicide rate. Sure. This is propaganda. I want to show you this story. It's a video from SVT in Sweden. Transbarnen means trans kids, a Swedish documentary about the harm being done to children. I'd like to read for you this paragraph. Now look, I want to tell you this. We've got to help. We've got to help people who are suffering from dysphoria. This story from Pink News I'll get into in a minute shows a massive uptick in this occurring, and we need to figure out what the answer is. I don't think the answer is letting minors make life-altering decisions to their bodies. I think the answer is we need to understand it better, look at the evidence, and then figure out what the risks are. And I think the risks are severe. But I'll also add this. I want to make sure this is clear. I think the parents should decide what is right for their kids. You see, conservatives come out and say that when it comes to schools, like parents should ultimately decide. But they don't mean that entirely, because they would not want parents providing gender-affirming care to their children. I certainly don't either, but I also am just thinking these families are going to make decisions for themselves. They're going to decide what's better for their kid. If that's what they deem best, I'm reluctant to say the government should intervene to make decisions for the families. as much as I do think it's going to be bad for these kids in the long run. Here's what we see from bioedge.org. It's reporting on the SVT documentary. They say, here's what they found. At the age of 11, Leo embarked upon puberty blockers. The child and her mother were told this was standard treatment and reversible. Quote, Leo was little when she wanted to become a he. Her mother Natalie told the reporter, Carolina Gemsby, I thought if this was his wish, I should agree with it. Everyone said Leo was brave to come out and I should be proud of him. End of quote. Repeat the line. I'm kidding. The puberty blockers were meant to stop Leo from developing breasts, wider hips, and menstruating. Their use is based on the so-called Dutch protocol developed in the Netherlands in 2011. But as Gemsby points out, some experts have grave misgivings about their repeatedly cited research. The worry comes from the lack of long-term studies, and that the Dutch study alone is not sufficient evidence. It has too few subjects, no control groups, and was done at only one clinic. Since a well-known side effect of puberty blockers is a serious decrease in bone density, patients are supposed to be checked regularly. They should receive the powerful drugs for no longer than 2 years. Leo was on the medication for 4 years, and his bone density was never checked. The effects were little short of catastrophic. Leo now suffers from severe osteoporosis, a weakening of bones which is normally seen in people in their 60s and 70s. It is almost irreversible. His mother says that he was in pain from skeletal damage. He was constantly depressed, and he attempted to commit suicide several times. And therein lies the big problem with this. You know, that libertarian streak, I don't want to intervene when the medical professionals are talking with parents and parents choose. If the parents don't look at the risks and don't, do their research, well, then they're putting their children at risk. What do we do? Do we say the government should intervene? I don't know about that. But now look at this. Did it stop? Did this puberty blocker, was it life-saving? Pink news, was it life-saving? The answer is no. It nearly took the life of this child. We don't want that. This is so frustrating. They say, but information about the potential risks and lack of evidence never reaches Leo and his family. In fact, one of the most dismaying features of the Swedish journalist's report is mismanagement in the medical bureaucracy. One group diagnosed children's gender dysphoria. Another administered the medications. They didn't appear to communicate with each other. Patients were falling through the cracks. If this happens in one of the world's best hospitals, what happens elsewhere? Gemsby showed doctors incident reports not only on Leo, but at least 12 other children who had serious complications after embarking upon puberty blockers. The response? Creased brows and pursed lips and finger pointing and no answers. Not one. No one, it appears, was responsible. Quote, I think everyone involved in this case has good intentions. Dr. Ola Nilsson, an endocrinologist, said. But now, it's time to take a step back and try to get really good at data regarding what's best. How best to diagnose and treat this group so we do more good than harm. Much more good than harm. Minimal harm and a lot of benefits is the goal of all healthcare. Unfortunately, the picture painted by the Swedish journalist is one of minimal benefit for children and a lot of buck passing by doctors. Leo's back, shoulders, and hips are constantly aching. His distraught mother says, a 15-year-old shouldn't have to deal with that. His bones shouldn't look that way. A healthy skeleton that's been destroyed by this medicine. And this is the propaganda you get. Now, I know I run the risk of being banned outright for simply reporting on the news. It's the reality of what we're dealing with. Become a member at timcast.com to support our work directly. Because we know this YouTube stuff, especially as we get close to the elections, may not last very long. But I'm not going to back away from these stories, especially big stories like this. This is today. The Tavistock Gender Clinic is shutting down. People need to know this. Otherwise, the only thing that shines through is the propaganda. How is it that Leo, now suffering from severe osteoporosis, how does it come to be? Because the negative side effects are banned. When we try talking about this, saying, please take this seriously and do your research, know the risks, we get banned. When I go on Twitter and specifically highlight an adult man showing sexual imagery to children, they suspended my account. It was the first time I'd ever been suspended. Many of you may be aware that I tweeted out I was talking to my ad agency about calling out Twitter, and they said, unfortunately, that subject matter is not prohibited on billboards. And I said, okay, I wonder what I can do instead. I understand why they don't want to advertise that stuff. I do. Nobody wants to be associated with it. Pink News calls these puberty blockers life-saving. This story from SVT. Let me pull up the YouTube here. The date on this story, November 26th, 2021, is when this documentary came out, or at least when it was published on YouTube, showing what happened to these kids. Pink News wrote February 23rd, 2022. It's almost like they don't care about the negative consequences. I believe it's fair to say, if you come out and say, we believe they still do more good than harm for gender dysphoric kids, fine. But I have to wonder, why is it that there is such a major uptick, a massive explosion in the amount of young women specifically who are saying they are trans? I believe we need to look at the cultural crisis that is happening and what is causing this. I don't believe that every single child who says they're dysphoric was born that way. I do believe gender dysphoria is absolutely real. And I'll use the example of John Money as proof. You know the story of John Money? 2 twin boys were born. Botched circumcision resulted in the doctor saying he was going to raise one boy as a girl. That boy never adopted the female identity, ultimately choosing to detransition. Now, many people point out the crisis of transitioning children, but what I see here is that there was a gender identity. And I think it's entirely rational that there are people who are born, male or female, but do have a dissociation between their body and their identity. Just like this child, when he was forced to transition, ultimately did not, no matter, like, this is the thing. The individual was lied to across the board his entire life, but somehow he still knew. And I'm like, that says to me that the possibility exists for absolute gender dysphoria, where a child is born that way and they just feel something is wrong. The problem is I also think there is social pressure, gender dysphoria. When you can see that there's many people who identify as dragons or tigers, identity crises can be mental and not physical. Or maybe they're all mental. My point is, there's no circumstance where you're actually a tiger or why your identity would be fractured that way. And there's nothing we can do to make you a tiger. Maybe though. Identity crises are ingrained in the mind, and the best solution is mental help, mental therapy. I wonder. I'm not a doctor. And that's why I ultimately say, you can call me a fencer or whatever. I think parents should be deciding what's right for their kids. I do. This creates very serious problems when you have a man and a woman with a child together. Like we saw in Texas, where the mom wanted to transition her kid and the dad didn't. Ultimately, I lean towards we should not be giving children sex change operations. I don't think we should advocate for that, and I think we should find alternate solutions. But I also don't like the idea of the government intervening and telling a parent what medical treatments their kids should be getting. That's scary too. So I'm not going to pretend to have any of the answers. What I can say is this is the direction we're going. Tavistock in the UK shut down. In Sweden, mainstream media is already calling this out, and Scandinavian countries are moving away from this kind of medical sex change therapy or surgeries for children. There's no perfect solution. There never will be. And I will say, in the end, conservatives may be upset about this morally, but the end result is simple. If you sterilize your children through puberty blockers or surgeries, if you abort your children, I will say it again because I've said it before, the future will be conservative. Period. These parents are starting to homeschool their kids. They're taking their kids out of these indoctrination centers. Parents voted for Glenn Youngkin. They said no to the Democrats in Virginia. If this trend continues, there will not be children. Leo likely will never have kids. I mean, aside from the bone problems, the puberty blockers likely caused reproductive harm. So puberty is all about. It's about developing the ability to reproduce. And they're shutting it down, effectively sterilizing children in many circumstances. Not every, but many, depending on how long they're on these drugs. The end result is there right in front of our faces. The left is advocating for circumstances that will stop them from having kids. 20 years, we will see another generation. will be overwhelmingly conservative. Now, many people say conservative parents is no guarantee for conservative kids, but with the culture war going the way it's going, I think it's leaning in that direction. You abort your kids, you sterilize them, you don't have any. So the future is going to be Republicans probably at lower, I believe below replacement levels, but we're going to see among the left substantially less in terms of reproduction. Not even having one kid. We're seeing so many of these families, or whatever you want to call it, I shouldn't call it that, polygamous relationships where you have like a woman with like 5 boyfriends. They're not having kids. They're aborting their kids. They're using contraceptions, IUDs, birth control. And then when they do have kids, they're more likely to sterilize them. And with the explosion, 1,000+ increase, what do you think the end result is going to be? I don't know what will happen. I never do. I'm not a psychic. But if this is the trend, the United States may very well see the same thing happen, and puberty blockers will eventually be shut down, and these clinics will stop. At least that's what's happening in Europe. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.